Sometimes history is not measured by the years that pass, but by the wounds it leaves. Between 1933 and 1945, Europe witnessed a political project that transformed hatred into a system, discrimination into law, murder in bureaucracy. The Holocaust was not an accident, it was the result of a long process of dehumanization that began long before the war. To understand the denial of that crime, first you have to understand its origin. After the First World War, Germany was in the throes of humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles, runaway inflation and mass unemployment created fertile ground for the extreme ideologies. In this context, a man emerged, Adolf Hitler, and a party, the National Socialist Party, which promised to restore the lost greatness. But his vision of the world it was built on an old and poisonous idea, antisemitism. From the outset, the Nazis presented the Jews as the enemy within. The propaganda described them as responsible for all evils. Communism, capitalism, the defeat of Germany, even the moral decay of Europe. In 1933, just 2 months after coming to power, the Nazi regime began to transform prejudice into a policy of oppression. State. The Nuremberg Laws, enacted in 1935, eliminated the civil rights of the Jews and forbade intermarriage. Discrimination became visible in the streets, in the shops, in schools. Posters with the phrase Judenvergast, unwanted Jews, appeared all over the country. Children learned in the classrooms that there were superior and inferior races. The newspapers and the cinema repeated day after day the same message, that the Jew was a threat to the purity of the German people. In November 1938, hatred became visible. During the Christact or Night of Broken Glass, more than 1,000 were destroyed. Synagogues, shops were set on fire and tens of thousands of Jews were arrested. It was the first sign that violence, it would cease to be symbolic. That pogrom was not spontaneous, it was organized by the state. The police were ordered not to intervene. As the windows covered the streets, the message remained. Of course, anti-Semitism was no longer an opinion, it was an official policy. When World War II began in September 1939, persecution became a plan to extermination. The invasion of Poland brought millions of Jews under Nazi control. In occupied cities, the Germans created ghettos, closed areas where families were isolated, crowded together and condemned to die of hunger or diseases. Warsaw, Lodz, Krakow, names that became symbols of suffering. Inside the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto, more than 400,000 people were confined to one space of just a few square kilometers. Hundreds died every day, but the horror that would come later would surpass even that brutality. In 1941, after the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi regime took a decisive step towards genocide. The units, their mobile phones, known as Einsatzgruppen, followed the German army and executed Jews, gypsies, and commissars en masse. Politicians. Tens of thousands were killed in mass graves, especially in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic countries. But hand murder was slow and inefficient. The regime was looking for a more systematic solution. From this perverse logic was born what the Nazis called the final solution to the Jewish problem. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Pskek, Chelmno, and Majdanek. 6 names that today are synonymous with planned death. In these camps, murder became an industrial process. Trains arrived every day. The victims. They were searched, stripped of their belongings, separated from their families, and taken to the gas chambers. In Auschwitz-Birkenau is estimated that more than 1.1 million people were killed. Most were Jewish, but there were also Poles, Gypsies, Soviet prisoners of war, and other persecuted groups. Cyclone B gas, the chimneys, the ovens, it was all part of a machinery designed to kill en masse and hide the evidence. The German bureaucracy recorded every detail. There were forms, quotas, daily transportation reports. The genocide was carried out with chilling administrative precision. The executioners were not mythical monsters, they were civil servants, engineers, doctors, accountants, people who under normal circumstances would have led ordinary lives. Obedience, fear and ideology turned ordinary men into accomplices in extermination. When the Third Reich fell, in 1945, the world discovered the scale of the crime. Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz on January 27. The Americans entered Buchenwald and Dachau. The soldiers' cameras. They recorded piled-up bodies, living skeletons, ovens still hot. During the Nuremberg trials, the Nazi documents themselves served as evidence. No court in the history had had so much direct proof. That is why, in 1946, U.S. Attorney Robert Jackson told the judges, "The crime we are talking about is not hypothetical, it is hypothetical." Documented with the killer's own ink. The Holocaust left a deep wound in humanity. More than 6 millions of Jews were killed along with millions of civilians of other nationalities. Their names, their lives, their faces were recorded in photographs, diaries, and testimonies. And yet, with the passage of time, the memory became fragile. The distance between the facts and the new generations opened the space for the doubt, manipulation, and lies. This is the point where history meets its shadow, when the real it begins to be denied and silence threatens to replace truth. Remembering is not just looking at the past, it is a form of resistance, because every time someone denies what happened, they try to kill again, not the victims, but to the truth. The first deniers. 1945. 1970. When the bombs stopped falling and the armies returned to their countries. Europe was silent. The ruins covered entire cities. The scars. They were not only on the walls, but in the collective consciousness. During the years after 1945, the world tried to understand what had happened. The Nuremberg trials had clearly established that the Holocaust was a crime planned, executed, and documented. But even before the sentences were pronounced, the first voices of denial were already beginning to emerge. The regime. Hitler had fallen, but his ideas did not disappear entirely. Some of his collaborators survived, changed their names, or fled to other countries. Others, from exile, tried to justify the unjustifiable. They said that the figures were exaggerated, that the concentration camps were workplaces, that gas chambers were inventions of Allied propaganda. That was the seed of denialism, the idea that the truth could be relativized if a lie was repeated long enough. In the 50s, Germany was rebuilding itself on ruins of the Reich. The priority was to build a new, modern, democratic nation. But in that process, many preferred not to talk about the past. The word Holocaust, it wasn't even common. There was talk of war, Nazism, the difficult years. Silence became a form of survival. In that void of memory, some took the opportunity to rewrite history. Small groups, former Nazi sympathizers or revisionists of the extreme right began to publish pamphlets that questioned the Nuremberg trials. They said that the Allies, they had manipulated the evidence, that the testimonies of the survivors were emotional, therefore unreliable. Nothing could be further from the truth. These lies were a way of continuing the war by other means. The war against the truth, the post-war period, was also a time of intellectual debate. Europe wondered how it had been possible Nazism. Philosophers such as Hannah Arendt wrote about the banality of evil, while others sought psychological or sociological explanations. But among the shadows of that reflection appeared voices that they tried to relativize the crime. One of the first was the Frenchman Maurice Bardèche, who in 1948 published Nuremberg a terra promis. In it, he questioned the legitimacy of the judgments and suggested that the victors had committed the same acts as the vanquished. It was the birth of historical revisionism, a term that in the hands of the deniers would become a propaganda mask. Legitimate revisionism. The critical analysis of sources was replaced by a toxic version whose objective was not to seek the truth, but to delete it. In the 60s, denial became more sophisticated. The French academic Robert Faurisson, a professor of literature in Lyon, began to claim that gas chambers had never existed. He said that They were impossible technical inventions. His publications were quickly refuted by historians, engineers, and survivors, but his ideas spread among anti-Semitic and ultranationalist groups. Forresson claimed that there was no material evidence of the extermination, but that statement ignored the official documents, the testimonials, written orders, and plans of the facilities. Their denial. It was not scientific, it was ideological. In reality, what I was looking for was not knowledge, but provocation. Denialism feeds on scandal, media coverage, and the desire to put the he doubts what has already been demonstrated. In 1961, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust, put the issue back at the center of the global debate. Captured in Argentina and taken to Israel, Eichmann was tried publicly. For weeks, the cameras transmitted the testimonies of more than 100 survivors. Their stories gave face and voice back to the tragedy. They showed the magnitude of the suffering and the precision of the Nazi system. Man, sitting in his cockpit. Kristall listened impassively. When asked if he regretted it, he replied, "I didn't follow orders." That coldness disarmed any attempt at denial. For the first time, the world saw in real time the human dimension of the Holocaust. Despite this evidence, the deniers persisted, clung to increasingly absurd arguments, that the documents were false, that the witnesses they lied, that the numbers were inflated. Some even claimed that the war it had been a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world. A recycled idea of the false protocols of the sages of Schaun, an anti-Semitic pamphlet from the early 20th century that had been debunked decades earlier. Antisemitism, camouflaged by historical skepticism, continued to be the engine of denialism. Over the years, denialism merged with neo-Nazi and nationalist movements while Germany and Austria banned the symbols of the Third Reich. In other countries such as the United States or the United Kingdom, organizations began to emerge that they spoke of historical revision. In 1967, the Forresterl Institute was founded. Review, which would later become one of the most influential denialist dissemination centers in the world. From California, they published newsletters and conferences that appeared to be academically rigorous, but were full of falsehoods and omissions. Their objective was simple: to sow doubt. And in the post-war period, where people wanted to forget, doubt was a powerful tool. Meanwhile, the survivors were beginning to age. Many did not want to talk. The trauma was too deep. Her children, however, began to ask, where was the world when his parents were being persecuted? Why was there so much silence? In the 60s, writers such as Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel broke that silence. His books, Yes, This Is a Man and the Night, returned humanity to the statistics. They reminded the world that the Holocaust was not a story of numbers, but of people. In the face of oblivion and denial, literature and memory became resistance. In those years of reconstruction and silence, denial found its way. First chance. He took advantage of the fatigue of a Europe that wanted to look forward, but history, sooner or later, early, he always returns to claim the truth. And when the echo of denial grew louder, new voices, those of witnesses, academics, and judges were preparing to respond. Because denying is not only lying, it is betraying the memory of those who could not tell their story. History is based on evidence, documents, photographs, testimonies, objects. Without them, memory fades away. With they, the truth remains. The Holocaust is not a hypothesis or a rumor. It's one of the most documented events in the entire history of humanity, and yet there are still those who do not. They deny. That is why this chapter does not seek to convince, it seeks to show. In the warehouses of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, millions of original documents, letters, orders, military records, transport records, inventories of confiscated belongings. Each sheet is a piece of evidence, a window into the perverse logic of genocide, an order signed by Heinrich Himmler, a deportation list with 1,003 names sent from Paris to Auschwitz in July 1942. A telegram with the coded phrase to Judenfrage in Lausematigt. The Jewish question is a confirmed final solution. They are cold fragments of precise machinery. Nazi bureaucratic language transformed murder into administration. Words like evacuation, relocation, or special treatment hid the reality behind rhetoric. But the evidence speaks for itself. Between 1942 and 1945, the Germans deported more than 5 million people on trains to the death camps in the East. Each train, it was recorded with departure time, number of wagons, number of prisoners, and final destination. One of the most striking documents are the Hoffel Report, discovered in 2000 in the British archives. It was a internal SS communication sent in January 1943 detailing the exact number of Jews murdered to that date in 4 camps. 434,508. In Belzec, October 1370 in Sauveur, 713.55. In Treblinka 24, 73 in Lublin-Denik, in total 1,274,166 people, and that was only the partial balance of a year. An accounting report of extermination. The Nuremberg trials marked a point of no return in the history of international law. For the first time, a court tried not just individuals, but an entire system. 4 months, Allied prosecutors presented irrefutable evidence, footage taken by the Allies themselves. Soldiers liberating the camps, official documents from the rich, testimonies of Nazi officers. Commander Rudolf OSS, responsible for Auschwitz, testified with chilling serenity. I supervised, personally, the extermination of 2.5 million people by gas in Auschwitz. Your written statement, and signed, was one of the most conclusive pieces of evidence in the trial and was not an isolated testimony. Dozens of officers. They confirmed the existence of the gas chambers and described in detail their operation. In 1945, the Soviets confiscated the original architectural plans of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Designed by the Office SS Construction Center, showed the layout of the barracks, the landing ramps, and the chambers, with ventilation systems and ducts of Cyclone B. In the Moscow archives, these plans were preserved 4 decades before being digitized and analyzed by historians. Its authenticity was verified by multiple independent experts. Gas chambers are not an Allied invention, as they claim. The deniers. They are physical structures described by the engineers who built them, the guards who built them, and the guards who built them, operated, and the prisoners who survived. Between 1994 and 1999, the USC SOA Foundation gathered more than 52,000 video testimonies from Holocaust survivors and witnesses, people from all countries, religions, and ages. Their stories coincide in thousands of details. The smell, the smoke, the trains, the separations, the numbers tattooed on the arms. Many describe identical scenes without ever having met. That collective coherence is proof in itself. Deniers say memory can fail, and it is true, but when tens of thousands of people report the same facts with millimetric precision, doubt becomes deliberate denial. The evidence is not only in official documents, but also in everyday objects. Children's shoes, toothbrushes, suitcases with handwritten names. Thousands of personal belongings were found in Auschwitz warehouses. They are the material traces of interrupted lives. The museum preserves more than 110,000 pairs of shoes and 3,800 suitcases, with visible names. Each one is a story, proof that they existed. The photographs taken by the Germans in 1944, known as the Auschwitz album, accurately show the process of arrival, selection, and execution. The images were analyzed by experts, independent compared to documents, and located in the physical space of the field. Everything fits, every stone, every shade, every uniform. Science has also confirmed the evidence. Researchers in forensic archaeology and Caroline Sturdical-Calories have conducted soil surveys between Blinka and Sobibor using ground penetration. They found remains of underground structures, foundations of gas chambers, pits, and human fragments. Everything coincides with historical testimonies. The excavations do not seek sensationalism, they seek to name the disappeared and confirm once again that the Holocaust is not a belief, it is a fact. The crime of the Nazis was so massive and so meticulous that their own records condemn them. With that phrase, prosecutor Robert Jackson summarized the essence of the trial. It was not a matter of revenge, but of establishing a legal truth. And that truth remained written forever in more than 40 volumes of minutes, testimonies, and documents. Today those minutes are preserved, digitized in the U.S. National Archives and the United Nations. Anyone can read them. There's none conspiracy, there is no manipulation. Just facts. The evidence is scattered by the world. At Yad Vashem, more than 4 million names are registered. In the Berlin Museum, fragments of original walls and administrative documentation in Buenos Aires. Testimonies of refugees who escaped the horror. Each of these places holds a part of the memory collective. Together they form a real global network. And yet, there are those who choose not believing. Denying the Holocaust is not an act of ignorance. It is a direct challenge to the evidence, an attempt to destroy the very foundations of historical knowledge. In a world where facts can be distorted, the truth needs guardians, and those guardians are the archives, the museums, the books, the witnesses, and those who choose to remember. History is not defended with opinions, but with evidence. And as long as there is a single photograph, a single letter, a single voice that speaks, the truth will continue being irrefutable. The digital age and modern disinformation. For decades, the memory of the Holocaust was kept alive by testimonies, archives, and education. But at the beginning of the 21st century, history faced a new enemy, digital disinformation. In a world interconnected where every person can publish and spread information instantly, lies travel faster than the truth. And among them, one of the most dangerous is Holocaust denial. What used to be disseminated in printed pamphlets now spreads with a click. Websites, blogs, and channels. Video games offer alternate versions of the story. Use academic language, out-of-context quotes, and manipulated graphics to give the appearance of legitimacy. Modern deniers don't usually shout or raise flags. With spastics, they hide behind anonymous profiles, technical words, and a false skepticism. They talk about review, independent research, or freedom of expression. But his goal? It is the same as in the 50s, sowing doubt and weakening memory. On platforms like YouTube, Facebook, or X, before Twitter, information flows unfiltered. Algorithms do not distinguish truth from lies, they only prioritize what is. It generates more interaction. And Holocaust denial, like any conspiracy theory, provokes outrage, curiosity, and debate. That makes it profitable. A 2019 report by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in London identified more than 200 active channels and groups dedicated to disseminating disinformation about the Holocaust, some with hundreds of thousands of followers. Videos that mix images, real with false narratives, texts that reinterpret the facts with a language carefully chosen to confuse. The British historian Deborah Lipstadt, who faced the denier David Irvin in court, explains, the denial is not based on ignorance, but on intention. It's not ignorance, it's ideology. Deniers select fragments of truth and surround them with falsehoods. They say, no direct evidence, omitting millions of documents. They say, the numbers don't add up, manipulating historical contexts. They say, no, there were gas chambers, ignoring the testimonies of the perpetrators themselves. In the digital age, the manipulation has become more sophisticated. It is no longer necessary to invent an entire story. Just distort a part. Holocaust denial is now intertwined with other hate speech. Antisemitism, climate denialism, theories about global elites. It's all part of it. Of an ecosystem that seeks to replace facts with emotions. Words become weapons. The lies are. They repeat until they seem to be truths, and the algorithms do the rest. The phenomenon. It has a name, post-truth, a time where facts matter less than beliefs, where emotion weighs more than the evidence. Meanwhile, the Holocaust has also become a media symbol. Photographs, movies, series. Collective memory has been fragmented between history and history. Popular culture. This exhibition, although necessary, also generates a paradox. As more people learn about the Holocaust, the less they understand it in depth. And in that space of superficiality, negation finds fertile ground. An anonymous comment on a forum can reach millions of views. A denialist phrase disguised as doubt can travel through the world in seconds. In the face of this tide of misinformation, survivors have spoken out once again. People who are now over 90 years old are connected to video calls, conferences, and virtual schools. Some do it from hospitals or nursing homes, aware that their time is running out. One of them, Roman Kent, said in 2019, "When the witnesses are gone, history will be in the hands of those who were never there." That is the real threat of the 21st century, the transition from the living memory to digital memory. And digital memory can be manipulated to combat this phenomenon. Many countries have updated their laws. Germany, France, Austria, Spain, and several Latin American states criminalize public denial of the Holocaust, not as censorship, but as censorship. Defense of historical truth. In 2021, the European Parliament stated that the Holocaust denial is a modern form of antisemitism. Digital platforms, under pressure by organizations such as UNESCO and the World Jewish Congress, began to remove denialist content. But a battle is not won with algorithms, it is won with education. Today, new generations are learning about the Holocaust not through books, but through screens, digital museums, augmented reality experiences, virtual tours of Auschwitz. The challenge is enormous. How to teach the truth in a world where everything can be opinion seems. Some educators have understood this. They use the same tools of the 21st century, video, social networks, audiovisual narratives for teach the real story, because memory can also adapt, and as long as it does, it will survive. The combat between truth and lies is no longer fought on the battlefields, but on the servers. The new weapons are not guns, but words, images, and algorithms. Denying the Holocaust today doesn't. It requires uniforms or rallies, just a keyboard and an audience willing to believe. Therefore, the responsibility does not fall on not only in governments or institutions, but also in each one of us. In the digital age, remembering, it's not just looking back, it's learning to distinguish the truth from the noise. Because if the lie spreads in second, memory needs patience, education, and courage. The Holocaust, and to deny it in any form is to repeat the darkest error of the humanity. Every generation has its battle against oblivion. Ours does not. It is fought with weapons or armies, but with memory. The Holocaust was not only a crime against a people, it was an open wound in humanity, an eternal warning about what happens when hatred becomes law and hatred becomes the law. Indifference becomes customary. In 1945, the soldiers who opened the gates of Auschwitz, Buchenwald Bergen-Belsen, believed that by showing the world what they had seen, horror could not. That images would suffice, that humanity would learn, but the time proved otherwise. Forgetting is persistent, and every time a lie repeats itself, history is once again faltering. Today, more than 80 years later, antisemitism has not disappeared, it has become a reality. Has transformed. He no longer wears a uniform or armband, but he continues to look for goats. Scapegoats, continues to sow hatred. The internet amplifies it, indifference. It normalizes it, and ignorance feeds it. Therefore, remembering the Holocaust is not only looking at the past. It is to understand the present. In museums, classrooms, and memorials around the world, millions of people visit each year the places where barbarism occurred. Some go out of respect, others out of curiosity, many in search of answers. They all find the same lesson, that civilization is fragile and memory, his only defense. Writer and survivor Elie Wiesel. He once said, "The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference." And it is precisely this indifference that allows lies to flourish. In schools, teaching the Holocaust is not. It means teaching ancient history. It means teaching to recognize the mechanisms of hatred, the power of language, the manipulation of the masses. It means teaching empathy. When a teacher shows his students a photograph of a concentration camp, he doesn't just teach them a fact, he shows them what happens when silence replaces consciousness. And when a society stops looking back, it stops looking back. To see forward every name engraved on a plaque, every stone placed in a tomb, is an act of resistance against oblivion. Deniers can distort data, but they can't erase the weight of names. Every life told is a test, every story transmitted a victory over lies. In Israel, Yad Vashem, it continues to record the names of unknown victims. In Europe, the Stolperstein, small golden plates embedded in the sidewalks, they remember the families who were torn from their homes. And in Latin America, descendants of refugees keep alive the story of those who survived by crossing oceans. Thank you for joining Historical Archives. Subscribe for weekly documentaries, forgotten stories, and legendary moments. Until next time, keep exploring history.